everybody, and welcome to the second episode of my Kitchen Table Talks. And I am joined by the wonderful, magical, beautiful Fio Gede Parma. Hello, Fio.
Hi.
Hi. So, Fio, to start off with, what country are you in?
Well, I'm in Gadigal and Bidjigal country in so-called Australia. And so for us here, we call this acknowledgement of country. And so I want to acknowledge that I am in their country. And that also includes the sky country, the sea country, the valleys, the plains, the scrub country, up to the mountain. And I acknowledge their elders, past and present. I acknowledge these people's resistance and fighting against colonialism and imperialism to this day. I acknowledge their science, their government kinship structures, their law. I acknowledge their ceremony and their song. I acknowledge their old people. I acknowledge their descendants and their activists and their parents and children and aunties and uncles. I acknowledge their magic and their spirit. I acknowledge their complex fragmentation caused by colonialism, but also in the face of that, innovation, thriving, beauty, joy, grief, pain, rage. And I acknowledge that I am in this too. And I aspire to be a responsible guest, even acknowledging that my direct ancestors are settler colonizers in this country.
Thank you. And I, in turn, would like to not only celebrate, but acknowledge that I am on the land of the Sargeen of Cape Croker First Nation, which is a member of the much larger Anishinaabe people in Turtle Island. And so, with that being said, for those who don't know who Fio is, I'm sure by now many of the listeners, because we're all tradcraft folk, know who you are. But if they don't know who you are, Fio Gede Parma is a Balinese-Australian non-binary witch, international teacher, and magical mentor. Fio is a co-founder of the Coven of Wildwood and a midwife of the Wildwood Tradition. They have been initiated into 4 traditions of the craft and serve and celebrate as priestex and lover with many spirits and gods. Fio has authored or co-authored 6 previous books, including Elements of Magic and The Magic of the Iron Pentacle. Visit them at fiogedeparma.com. And if you look down below Fio there, you will find their information. They also just came out with this beautiful book, The Witch
Hooray!
Belongs to the World, which is not just a book, it is a whole experience. Let's start out by talking about this experience, Fio. Tell us about it. What's going on with it?
Well, for me, it's so many things. Like for me, I look at that book and I think of all of the intense rigor and discipline it took to write it. Like I wrote the first draft very intensely over the period of about 45 nights after an astrology reading where my friend and kind of main astrologer she said, oh, you're moving into, it was my birthday. She was like, you're moving into a 10th house year. So this is, your 10th house is Scorpio. The ruler of Scorpio is Mars. Your Mars is in Aries in the 3rd house. That's a house of publishing. You've got a book to write, Fio. And if you do not do it now, you will never do it. I was like, okay. And then I went into my Mars and Aries and I fucking did it. Yes, Australians swear. And then and then it was a long kind of process actually as books being written and drafts and publishing and back and forth. But the whole thing is stunning because it's now been out at the time of this recording, it's been out for 3 months, actually to the day, actually specifically.
Really? Wow. Oh, we timed that well.
Yeah, and I'm just so happy. And, a really interesting series of synchronicities have also happened in the last 3 months that have meant and allowed that it has had a bigger platform, which I'm just so happy about. And because this is the first book I have written on my own, like as a single living human, because I really experienced that it's a constellation of creation from a variety of spirits with me, but and also deeply inspired by my embeddedness in living community with other living humans and other living systems. But it's the first book I've written on my own since God, since I wrote Ecstatic Witchcraft, which I wrote in 2010, 2011. So it was like, and I wrote the first draft of The Witch Belongs to the World in 2021. So a whole decade had passed. Much had happened to me. And I really kind of wanted to express some of that in the book. And so I'm a really strong fan of non-linear, non-A to B kind of writing and facilitating, because witchcraft for me is all about, well, sometimes it's about disorientation, sometimes it's about enchanting people into a state of topsy-turviness, and it can be about traveling a labyrinthine spiral of existence. And so I wanted to kind of represent that. I didn't want there to be, I was very fierce about it not having like exercise 2.B, which is fine. That's another sacred form of writing books, absolutely. But I did not want this book to look like that. I wanted this book to be this spell that was woven, that had clear markers, but was also kind of completely raw, completely sensuous. I recently saw someone review this on TikTok, and they were so frustrated, but by the end of their review, they were like, oh, but by the end of this book, I really understood that The Witch Belongs to the World, and it's a really good book. And I was like, good. I want you to be frustrated. I want the general Western trained reader to be like, what the fuck? And that I am getting that a lot. And I've also heard, people who are several decades older than me say to me, and deeply practiced in the craft, say to me, I'm questioning my whole witchcraft practice. And I'm like, good. That's the whole point.
Well, so on that note, let's go behind the script there. Let me ask you directly then, as you were writing this, keeping in context that this was the first time after how many years of writing your own, like by yourself, what did you notice by the end of it? Well, how long did it take to write, first of all, like the whole publishing process? How long was that?
Yeah. Let me think about that. So if I started in July 2021, and this book came out in August 2023, I guess it took me, well, yeah, from there to publishing 2 years. And actually, as I was flying from so-called Sydney to so-called Los Angeles, in May of 2023, I was literally on the final galleys putting in, I was like, no, you have to change this and you have to change this. So up until I think that was the 22nd of May, which is actually my dear beloved co-author's friend birthday. I was still putting finishing touches on May 22nd. So it took me, I guess, from July 23rd, my birthday in 2021, to May 22nd, exactly. I'm ruled by Saturn, so that's how I know these dates.
It's all good. No, it's all good. No, but it took me about the same. I mean, I think I started writing mine. I finished mine in August of 2021. And then it took however long, like until mine came out.
Yeah.
What did you notice about it though? Because when you're in editing, at least my process is that I'm not looking at the whole picture. I'm looking at little tiny pieces. So I'm not really paying attention to the whole overall thing. When you actually looked over the whole thing after it all came out, what did you notice? And how was that different for you?
I was scared of it.
Yeah.
Like I was like, whoa, Fio, what have you done? So I was a little scared of it. In a holy dread kind of way. I was like, ooh, okay. That's some revealing pieces of memoir. Are you sure you want to say that and that and that? But it was actually really important to me, as it is in my teaching, to constantly kind of undermine this idea that anyone, including myself, is like any kind of like paragon of good. And so there are parts of, I'm pretty honest about my past fuck ups in romantic relationships in there. and just like the idea of messing up, I think the whole thing, I think really the whole thing is actually this wonder voyage around heartbreak, actually, but
Right.
but heartbreak as the central ethos of existential crisis of being a human and being alive.
Mm.
And I think that is really the thing that is powering the spell of becoming. Like the whole point of this whole book is that someone will arise or could emerge from entangling with it. And again, a lot of people in my life, they're like, oh, the reason I can't go onto Amazon right now and review your book is because I have to read like a chapter per month. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. I wrote it that way. I kind of shot myself in the foot there. like, um, and that's like, so they're all like, everyone's taking it very seriously, including my mother, who's like, well, I'm like, Mom, have you finished the book yet? She's like, no, I'm on chapter 3. Like you told, like in the book, you're like, take your time, go for a walk. I'm like, God damn it. Because also as a writer, I really, you would get this, I really do want to hear, I'm like, how is it landing with you? But everyone's like, oh, but I'm simmering and immersing in it. I'm like, so that's the other part. I realized, oh, I created this thing that is really a slow burn. Like it's actually, which is ironic considering how the first draft came about, which was Mars and Aries, like 45 nights, deal with it. Write 1,000 to 2,000 words a night, which I did, and it was bizarre. So I realize now that I did this thing that is also how one ought to, I think, kind of apprentice to the craft. It's a slow burn.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, that's the nature of experience, though.
Yeah.
You experience, and then it's afterwards putting all the pieces together, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What was the context for you then of when you started to write it? Like, what was happening for you in that point in your life? I mean, it's a very intimate book, like you said, and all of these pieces coming up. What was happening
Yeah.
for you?
Well, I had a few months earlier moved to a new city with my partner at the time. We had been thrust into a full-on lockdown, like, and it was my first experience. It was 2021, but it was my first experience really after the initial lockdown of like, you will now be in quite intense lockdown for 3 months. I was living with my partner at the time. And I wasn't like, usually in my life, I'm used to being very, very, very extremely occupied with many things. I wasn't.
Mm.
And even though I was like, I hadn't stopped teaching online, I hadn't stopped doing mentorships, but for some reason there was like a general lull in the middle of that year for me in work. And I was like, well, I guess seize the moment. And so I was just awake at night really late, often at 2 or 3 a.m. writing, and while my partner's asleep, and my ex-partner, and just like feeling everything move through me in the face of, I think I mentioned it somewhere in the book, but in the face of just like, whoa, is this COVID thing ever going away? Are these lockdowns forever? Um, uh, am I going to have yet another ridiculous argument about vaccine technology with someone? Like, because do you remember that? Do you
I
remember?
do.
Like, I'm suddenly like flashing back as I say that to like the vitriol that even at points I was participating in. And I would have done it like most of the time. I was just kind of affirming, vaccines are important. Let's not shit on vaccines. Da, 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 da. I am no virologist. I am no scientist. I'm no like why like but I actually cannot believe that we were doing that to each other. Like
It
we
was
were
such a
just ripping.
bizarre time.
Yeah,
We were ripping each other to shreds. We
it
really
was
were.
horrible. It
Yeah.
was horrible.
It was bizarre for me because at the time I was actually working in a bookshop, and
Mm,
people who were coming in who were consuming literature, you could see the type of literature that they were ordering, and
mm.
the way that was weaving ideas in their head. And then they would ask you, what do you think of this? Have you read this, anti-Dr. Fauci book? And it's like, Yeah, it was a very strange time. It was a very strange
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had written this book now, out of that context, how different do you think this would be?
Oof. Why? No, that's a really clever question. Are you a Gemini? I don't.
No, Virgo, worse.
Virgo. Oh, the other sign ruled by Mercury. Um, yeah, clever question, my friend. Ah, I don't even know. Okay, if I was writing it now, it would sound probably a little. I don't think the book sounds sad at all. I think it's very hopeful. I'm a very hopeful person, but I think it would probably have a more
This
like positive.
picture is very hopeful.
I think it's like a. I think it would have potentially a more positive vibe. um, I don't know. I think that chapter, there's a central chapter in there on the lady in which I go into extreme personal reflection around heartbreak and love. Because I'm in currently deeply in love again, that would be a different end to that story. But I'm actually happy that it kind of was where it was. Um, but where I am right now is where I left it off there, which is like, love people, love, like fiercely loved. um yeah, so I think there would be that message really underscored, perhaps in a different tonal way. I would have ended the same way. I would have ended with that initiation chapter. It's always been my kind of like, it's always put a bee in my bonnet when people are discussing like this reductive duality between, no, it's a dedication to the path and then you're initiated into, and I'm like, come on now, have you read the witch trial records? Have you looked? And no matter what we think about, how those confessions were coerced and torture was definitely involved, people were still responding from a matrix of embedded folklore, legend, what they thought and understood witches did. And that's not coming out of a vacuum. And so this idea, this kind of cross-cultural narrative of accused witches and spirit workers kind of coming across familiar spirits or the devil or the queen of Elfhame and receiving direct initiation from them, uh, hello. And so my whole point of this book and my whole thesis on the craft, ever since I was a little teenager reading books that were inspiring me, for instance, like Witchcraft and the Shamanic Journey by Kenneth Johnson, which deeply inspired me as a high school student. And now somehow by work of magic, he's writing the foreword for my reprint of Ecstatic Witchcraft, which
Oh,
just blows my
wow.
mind. Because
Oh,
that truly,
congratulations.
his book back then really affected me. But yeah, so I really wanted to have an initiation that was clear, and it said, here is an initiation structure. It is about witchcraft and her spirits directly initiating you.
Great.
Like, you go out into an uncanny place and an uncanny time. You're going to go out and do these things. These are established activators of the currents of witchcraft. Go ahead. I even also say maybe you're already initiated in houses or orders or lineages or covens, but you just want to do this. Go do it.
Yeah.
I would have ended there anyway. Yeah.
It's interesting. So listening to you and specifically that piece around love, what struck me when I was reading this, I know I posted on Facebook about this. When I was reading this, I was also reading Lee Morgan's recent book,
Mm-hmm.
which name completely disappears on me. Different context. Sorry, Lee. But that whole idea of taboo. And I was
Mm,
curious with yours because, in many ways, some of the things you raise in this, specifically
mm,
around love, specifically around self-initiation, and
mm,
that engagement, often is, at least for what I've seen and times felt, there's almost like a taboo around experiencing because so many people sit in armchairs or people
yes.
feel like they have to sit in armchairs. Can you talk
Yes.
around how taboo comes into your work in this?
Well, witchcraft is inherently about dancing with taboo
Mhm.
and about transgression. I think we can all kind of like academically, if not experientially, agree on that. Like if you're not shitting your pants, quote unquote, like while doing some witchcraft in good and whatever ways, is it the juice? I don't know. But taboo, okay. Again, another clever, good question.
I brought you on here to beat you up with good questions, just saying.
Yes,
So there's more coming.
You're very good at it. I find taboo interesting. You know, last at 2 a.m. watching Judith Butler talking about gender. And that's what I do often late at night. I just like put on YouTube videos like that and fall asleep to them. And I was like, oh, yes. And, you know, Judith Butler is this kind of famous gender scholar who a lot of people, you know, on various, basically they were saying that they think that everyone ought to have a theory of gender, that everyone actually does have a theory on gender. And that the thing about gender is that, and this is actually why I'm bringing this up, is that this is directly a part of this. They said in that short 14-minute YouTube video, which was brilliant distillation of their thesis and what they value now. Basically, they said gender thing that you can, and because they often talk about gender performance, but people hear that and they think that, oh, that's just making it up. False. It's like, no, all humans are performative. All humans have been performative since the dawn of time. We perform things. Their example was when someone says, "I now pronounce you man and wife," that is a performative utterance, was the phrase they used, that is real, and it has material, emotional, psychological, societal impacts. When people enact gender in whichever way they choose to enact it because of personal histories, because of an erupting, emerging cataclysm of existential crisis, whatever, when people do that, they are making reality. That's the thing that terrifies people about witchcraft. The thing, and that's the thing that I think most people on some deep level get, like whether or not they believe even witches can exist. Many people are beginning to become aware again that we do exist. And I think on some level they are realizing, whether they would phrase it this way or not, that when someone enacts being a witch, backed, of course, again, by felt sense, by emergent eruption of initiatory cataclysm, backed by family history or land history, whatever it is that's, you know, colliding to catalyze this, that person is becoming a witch. That person is becoming a witch. And that is threatening. That itself is threatening. Like, I don't know if I should go there, but look, Christendom still exists. It actually transplanted itself to the good old US of A. That is its that and the and then throughout its colonized parts of so-called South America deeply affects social relationships there. In fact, I would argue that it migrated from Europe. People don't give a shit about Christianity in Europe anymore. They don't. Yeah, they don't care. You know, maybe in the Eastern countries, maybe. But again, kind of different kind of cultural, geopolitical bioregion at this point. But Christendom very much still exists, and it has an agenda. And when I say Christendom, I'm not even talking about like folk Christianities. I don't. That's a totally different kettle of fish for me. But that whole kind of Western imperialist Christendom does exist, and it is deeply threatened by non-binary and trans people, by women having agency at all, by indigenous people having agency and demanding their land back, which is their land, by witches, by pagans, by people who are practicing traditions that are pluralistic and polytheistic and animistic and even monistic, mystically monistic. You know, they are everybody. They are shitting their pants over it. Yeah. So witches, you know, and very often you'll see something like, oh, you know, Republican blah blah says, you know, witches are blah blah blah. It's like, or you'll see, like, you know, I remember seeing like Sarah Palin years ago. There was a YouTube clip of her being exorcised or exorcising the spirit of witchcraft out of someone. It's like, this is so real to them, and it's real to us. So even writing a book about witchcraft and saying the witch belongs to the world is taboo, because a lot of people either are like, what the fuck is a witch, and what does that have to do with this world? Or, oh, witches are inherently supernatural agents of Satan, or witches are from yesteryear, and they're all like, oh, Wicker Man, like, oh, they're on islands in the mist. And
Very much so, very much so.
it's like, no, we live in your cities and villages and towns, and we are doing weird shit at night. You're right. But let me tell you, if you're listening to this, dear ones, we tend to really lovely people and actually highly ethical, just not in a moralistic way.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
In a much more organic way, absolutely. It's kind of weird timing. I was watching something by Helen Mirren a few hours ago. Weird timing. So she was talking about how Shakespeare and how Shakespeare, the stories of Shakespeare, are changing and evolving, and how she is so adamant that trans people take on these roles in Shakespeare. And,
good on you, Helen Mirren.
Oh, I love it. I'll send it to you afterwards. It's absolutely
please
amazing.
do.
Because she said that when you experience Shakespeare as an actor, oftentimes that whole gender piece, there's taboos about who can play which role. She said she wishes that she could have played Hamlet, because to have that poetry in her mind, to have that story flowing through her, would have been incredible. And now there are so many pieces around so-called gender bending, these characters, opening them up to the world, right? In many ways, it reminded me of not only queer people, but any marginalized people who stake in that liminal space, right?
Yes.
And that is deeply threatening to any of that Christian power structure, right? I'm curious what your take is on this. This isn't a gotcha, I swear, but the word witch has often been used as a pejorative against marginalized communities. Of course, you come from a Balinese background, and oftentimes non-Western traditions have been called witchcraft. I know this because I was involved with an African tradition where Lukumi was called witchcraft, and it isn't.
Yes, and it isn't,
And it isn't, right? But I'm curious for you, what is the nuance then around that reclaiming of the word witch, perhaps by people who come from backgrounds where it was never an indigenous name for themselves? What possibilities exist, but also what problems exist, do you think?
I actually had to discuss this the other day at the beginning of a course I was teaching, because it is true. I always go, yes, by the way, people are still being killed in parts of Africa, parts of India, parts of Papua New Guinea, because they are accused of malevolent sorcery, because they are accused of being witches. And this is also directly related to colonialism. It is directly related to it. So my thing about this is that, like, I know this is about to sound very scholarly, and it kind of is, but it also is like kind of older. Like, the word witch doesn't actually originate in anything that is decidedly or definitively evil at all. In fact, the only it probably, like, again, there's different ideas about this. A lot of people in the 60s and 70s were like relating it to this kind of wick, W-I-C, and saying that it was to bend and twist, which is unlikely but very poetically beautiful, and that gives us wicker, like W-I-C-K-E-R, like a wicker chair. But the more probable roots are in things like speaker with the dead, pourer of offerings, demarcator of the sacred, wise one, knowing one. And so like a connection, a family connection to wizard as well. So and then this brings us to, Old English witcher. This brings us to the mispronunciation of the modern word Wicca, as we know. But the thing is, that word was used very interestingly in like the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries by like English kings and English bishops and people who were writing in Latin and in these older forms of English or Middle English, and they were often suggesting or alluding to witchcraft and to this almost what seems to be, if you're reading all of this, you can kind of put this picture together. There seems to be a subgroup in this society that the people are calling witches, and the church does not like this. Like, so basically this old idea that some people poo-poo seems directly in the text, which is that the church does not like that there is a group of people who are called witches who the people seem to go to. That's the thing. The people seem to go to them. They go to them for advice. They go to them for healing. They go to them to find lost objects. So actually, there we go. And then, the early church was condemning witchcraft as a pagan superstition. That was their early take. And then sometime after the 1100s, 1200s, they're like, actually, maybe witchcraft is a heresy. And maybe it's satanic, and maybe they are agents of Satan. And then it gets really weird. And then, of course, we can discuss all the qualifiable, quantifiable kind of reasons. And I'm always a fan of the multiple reason scenario of why witches became why the witch hysteria kind of happened for 300 years. But the thing is, colonialism doesn't just colonize land, it colonizes with language and ideas. And so then you definitely have all of these people calling indigenous sacred ceremony traditions, forms of magic, witchcraft, which is it's just not true. And it pisses me off when people say, when people basically say anything magical is a witchcraft. Like when people say, look at them, they're blowing. I'm going to sound like such a bitch, and I'm going to embrace it. Look at them, they're blowing out birthday candles. Ha ha ha, that's witchcraft. I'm like, no, it's not. Like if you're a witch blowing out a birthday candle and making a wish, yeah, it's witchcraft. But look, they're putting a crystal under a moon. That's witchcraft. Oh, look, they're changing water. They're doing transubstantiation. That's witchcraft. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, is it a witch doing it? And is the context, is the context witchcraft, which again, historically, culturally, even to pagan societies, was always ecstatic, weird, kind of in the dark, in the forest. People didn't like that it was happening usually, but people still went to them. And this is the thing, when I consider Bali and I consider the way that people talk about the traditional healers, the Balians, and the way people talk about the Layaks, like the kind of nocturnal, kind of bad witches. But the thing is, across the board, there's a lot of nuance. It's not that dualistic. People are scared of the Balians as well, because they're like, well, what are they doing at night?
They're still wielding something, right?
Yeah. Because it's understood that when you know how to heal with the power, then you know how to hurt with it. Yeah. And that's the thing. That's the same. There are witches who are petty. That's true. Yeah. I don't think, when I teach the craft to people, I always warn them, don't be petty with it. The power will twist against you, But
can I jump in and ask you about that?
Yeah.
Can I jump in? So with that piece then, that piece about power and empowerment and responsibility. Responsibility comes into this book quite often.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, what's the take been on that? Because I know you teach about it a lot. But what's the general take? What was the feedback you've received around responsibility? Because I've certainly seen it with my own book, right? As soon as you say to people, you can be empowered, but you have responsibility if you take this power. They're like, what do you notice about what you've received?
Nothing particularly about that point in this book. But when I teach magic in general, I have often heard people go, but what about black magic? And what about people hurting me? And I always go, look, here's the thing. It is better not to move through the world worrying about that. Here's some simple things to learn that ought to become a part of your magical, mindful discipline and rhythm. Yes, grounding, purifying, warding, and then learning a system of divination to help you discern all kinds of communications. Absolutely, learn all of that. That's part and parcel of any magical spirit working tradition. Learn it, figure it out. But the thing is, do not go through that doorway of paranoia if you can help it, because then you will be seeing demons everywhere. I have seen these people, and you will become actually kind of a bit of a husk of yourself, because the more you do that and the more you are kind of bent on that idea, the more your own complexes will kind of haunt you. And the more you will basically just curse yourself. You will tie yourself up in knots. The curse is coming from inside the house, my friends. It is deeply. I mean, it depends on the part of the world you're in, because there are parts of the world where curses are flung a lot.
Yeah.
But generally, the people I'm talking to are part of the Anglophone countries. Look, the evil eye is everywhere. We know this to be true. But someone deliberately sorcerously sitting there cursing you right now, highly unlikely. And so, like, just relax. There's a phrase in that beautiful Drawing Down the Moon by Margot Adler, where my favorite part of it, I think it's also her favorite part of it, blessed be her memory, the interview with a modern witch in the middle of the book, where Sharon Devlin, the woman being interviewed, says something like, you have more to worry about out there with a man with a knife or a gun. Like that, actually, you have more to be concerned about in this middle realm than you do with the spirits. Yes, there are spirits that don't like humans. Yes, there are spirits that will eat you up if you let them. But generally speaking, if you are doing the things, the very simple baseline things, they're not going to be coming for you. They have like, and if you yes, there are viruses, they are spirits. Yes, there are illnesses, they are spirits. And yes, there are really scary things out there. But I have learned over time that I have more to be worried about amongst the humans. And not in a magical sense, just in a structural daily violence sense. So I guess I want to say that around, because people always bring that up. They bring up, and then I will say something cheeky like, we work magic literally for consequences, like, because people are always like, but what about the consequences? I'm like, yes, if you're unwilling to navigate consequences, I wouldn't be doing magic and I wouldn't be doing witchcraft.
I agree completely. It's funny. I was having a Zoom conversation a couple of weeks ago with somebody else, and it was like people complaining that their life isn't going right, their life isn't going well. All of this, their mentality is that this empowerment piece. That, well, if I do something, then I'm going to have to deal with consequences.
Yeah.
And I feel like that actually contributes to the whole idea of, well, I actually don't believe in magic, therefore I don't do it. But I believe in magic, right?
I know, and that's why for me always, I completely have been talked around by some of my beloveds around the belief, but generally for me, as someone who grew up in a non kind of belief situation where it was more very matter of fact and relational and ritualistic, like I actually don't, for me, belief has not much to do with my witchcraft. It's just about doing things, participating in reality, relating with portions of reality, and then noticing and paying attention. Like that's what I actually have always loved about witchcraft as a sorceress, mysticism, whatever, as a magical discipline, as a life way, is that it actually doesn't really ask us in most of its forms to believe in anything, but it is describing and reality to us in a way that is workable, and in a way that is empowering, and in a way that I can act and participate within it.
I suppose I should clarify. When I say believe, I mean more of that engaging with reality versus with engaging with the lenses and closing down those lenses, right? I feel like, and I see this with my therapy work all the time, the narratives that people tell themselves that then manifest their world, coming back to what we were saying and what's in the book, and what all of your stuff is about manifesting realities, right? The stories of, oh, well, I'm not going to do magic because I don't actually believe it will do anything because I'm so disempowered, right?
Yeah, like like a conviction, or even just an affirmation.
Exactly. Okay, go and get the book, people. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's got beautiful images in this. And let's talk about the images, because I don't often see such candid, I mean, I'll just show you. What's a good fit? Well, this one is one of my favorite pictures because it's just so stunning, and the power that comes out of it here. So throughout the book are beautiful candid shots from Fio's life. Fio's adventures, Fio's various activities. What was it like for you to go back through the final galley that had all of those images? And what was that like for you?
So emotional because I was traveling and I was like literally beginning this 10-week journey through Europe and the States. Like that's when I got them. And so I was just so overwhelmed, and I hadn't done a 10-week journey like that since 2019. And I was so used to doing that all the time previous to the pandemic or this particular pandemic. Um, so it was just very emotional. And also it felt like a spell because, well, I mean, it is a spell because in 2019, I had created with Luke Broman, who is the photographer and a dear friend of mine, and a Wildwood witch. I had created with him this thing that you can actually still buy, and it's called "Our Hearts Are Made to Break Open." And it's like this, I don't know how many pages it is, but it's a beautiful like magazine-y kind of thing. And it's got actually a lot of those photos in color, and it's got some of my poetry, which is now in that book, and an article on cursing, which is now in that book, kind of reworked, but several other pieces that are not in that book. So it's very worth getting if you feel like collecting things and looking at beautiful photos. But it's actually, super gorgeous. And when Luke and I did that together, we were just kind of just trying something out. And then I actually think that manifested this book, because the thing is, I didn't really, because that little zine is called Our Hearts Are Made to Break Open, which I also just said is pretty much the magical ethos or thesis of the book, The Witch Belongs to the World. But also, it wasn't my idea to have black and white, beautiful Luke photography. It was Alicia Gallo, who is a marvelous person and acquisitions editor at Llewellyn, who we both know. And she was like, "Hey Fio, why don't we fill the book with black and white photos of Luke's?" And I was like, "Wait, how do you know Luke?" Like, she's like, "I'm tracking you." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I'm like, "Oh, great, yes." And so that really is her idea. And because I was on about, no, it needs to not have, as I said, exercise 2.B. It needs to just be this kind of seamless, raw, intense, weird feast, which I know is not Llewellyn's thing. Like, I was always so aware of that. But it is also Llewellyn's thing because it is here and now. And Llewellyn is complex and nuanced as a publishing house. And so yeah. So I don't know. I just felt so like, whoa, I'm so happy that I get to have this book. And I get to have this, because people tell me, they're like, holy crap, this book is heavy, and it's heavy. Like it's literally heavy because of the ink and the paper stock and the photographs. But then they'll go, and it's heavy. And I'm like, it is heavy, and it's heavy. You are correct. Yeah.
So, okay. So I don't know where to go. Like, I could ask you like millions of questions, and you just go on, and it's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what's coming up next, because like the timing, right? The Static Witchcraft book that you wrote 12 years ago is being re-released. Different publishing house. What's that process been like to revisit that? Because you did change a little bit inside, and you revised it. Yeah. What was that like for you?
Humbling AF. Like, I actually also was, when a book comes out, I don't know what other authors do. I kind of like, I put it, I'm scared of it. Like, it's like, I don't want to look at it. I don't want to read it. I only ever read tiny pieces of it, and then I put it away. But I actually had to reread Ecstatic Witchcraft. And I was like, girl, like, good for you. Like, because I forgot. And, I think we're also, all of us internally, we have parts of us that are very self-condemning and very judgmental. And I had really judged harshly, really had this strong narrative, quite harsh on some of my older stuff. But I was like, actually, I was reading this book. This is the first book that came out. It's out of print. It won a cover award for best pagan book of that year, 2009. Like, this book was my first published book, and I was reading pieces of it last night because someone posted something about it, and I was like, I want to read it. And I was like shocked because I wrote that book when I was 18, and I was like, holy shit, that whoever wrote that book is a smarter writer than I am now. Like that, like I was like, who is this person? And so I was like really like quite surprised. But so I say that because reading Ecstatic Witchcraft shocked me. And I was like, oh, well, and then I wrote a revised kind of forward. Is it a forward or a preface? I actually am never sure. So there's
New
a forward.
introduction.
Yeah, I think a revised introduction. And I was basically like saying, look, I actually am still going to use the word shamanic and shamanistic in this book. And I actually I was like, look, I know it's not in vogue anymore to say this. I know that a lot of people will call me out. That's actually okay because I have been a part of the conversations around cultural respect and cultural appropriation much longer than you have, sir. This is also not you, sir. I know.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about some man in the corner. Like
Ooh, man.
like it's
Ugh.
yeah, right. People are going to cancel us for that too. Look, it's just like I guess that's my life. Like I'm a brown mixed, in the system mixed race person. I grew up a Hindu. People appropriate Hinduism all the time. This is my life. Like it's not theoretical to me. It's not conceptual to me. I'm from Bali, an island that is deeply, people call it neo-colonized now. It's just still colonization. But and people romanticize the Balinese all the time. Like it's complicated. So I was like, no, I'm sticking to it. I'm going to use the word shamanic and shamanistic because and even though in that book I totally talk about, Tungus speaking people, like originally when I wrote it, I was like, this is what this word means in their context as much as I can understand. And this is how this word shamanic or shamanistic is often applied by scholars, practitioners of various groups, including indigenous groups of other areas. Because it's a helpful signifier sometimes. We kind of all get it. We kind of all get that it means there is a healer, spirit worker who exists in the context of a community who went through an initiatory experience, perhaps in one day, perhaps over 10 years, where they were probably dragged to hell, and where they were probably taken apart or ripped apart or went through some intense sickness. And then they discovered their healing spirits, their helping spirits, and they got through it and they came back, and maybe they went to the upper world. It's different in different places. And then they're back, and then the community goes, oh yeah, we get it. And then as well as this, there are other cases, even in kind of the region of the world where this word is indigenous, where that's actually, it's different. It's like, oh, you're the child of the shaman, so therefore you're probably also going to be the shaman. So it actually depends. And some people kind of are shamans without ever being trained by a living human. That the community just that person in the community and the spirits all just realize what's going on, and then that person is fully treated as such, which is so funny in the face of these ridiculous, like the over exaggerated, like apostolic succession Western occult order thing. Like it just, because when that mixes with witchcraft, it creates this like really harmful narrative of what witchcraft is, which I have always kicked against my whole life, because even though I have been initiated into a variety of lineages, that did not make me a witch.
Well, this is the thing. When you tell people that in some places in the world, you become a witch because you digest something, and it's something that you consume, right? In some places, right? They're like, what? No, I'm a starch feeder. Sorry, I'll be cancelled for that. Just watch.
That's okay. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of all. I had to go through this thinking again around that terminology, which I definitely don't use as much now, but I still say things like shamanistic and shamanic because it's useful, and I always bring up the complexity of that. I am not a fan of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I am not a fan of deciding all of a sudden that I'm not going to use a term because people are like, oh, that's problematic. I'm like, yes, you're right, it is. Let's work with it. Like I'm not going to pretend that colonization is not affecting all of us and our language.
All the time, absolutely.
including the
Yeah.
word witch, right? Including that word.
Mhm.
So, and including words like gay and woman and earth and how we conceptualize Mother Earth. You know, there are lots of First Nations peoples who use ideas based on Western thinking to kind of communicate something that might actually not have existed for them prior to colonization, but
Yes.
now is useful, like in the case Mother Earth.
Mm.
Because that's a
It,
Western romanticized ideal, right? But actually, and is not necessarily native to a lot of First Nations cultures, but it's a useful way of communicating something that is true and real for them.
absolutely, it is. Absolutely. As a way of translating, right? As a way of
Yeah,
translating.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious for you then, it's not lost on me that one of the major lineages, I'm talking about lineages here, right? One of the major lineages you belong to and traditions is reclaiming. And I'm interested in the timing now because I remember the very first witchcraft book I ever received or was able to get my hands on was the 20th edition of the Spiral Dance.
Beautiful.
And
Yeah.
you can read the notes from the 10-year edition. Is
Mm-hmm.
this your 10? I mean, I know it's not exactly 10 years, but is this your 10-year edition? Are we going to get a little bit of commentary on in the actual text itself?
You know, it's more like it more exists in the reflection in the revised introduction, and it more
Mhm.
exists in the appendices. So
Ah,
there's 4 appendices that I added, and it kind of exists in there. But it's not direct, it's
mm,
not literal, like it's not literal revised notes. It's like more like you can read the appendices and kind of see, oh yes. But I kind of like I actually haven't received the edits back. You know, obviously it still goes through a similar edit. And for people who are fascinated by that, quickly, I'll just say that actually what happens is, you know, well, with me, I don't know about with other people, you hand in the draft and you get a series of notes basically saying, we need you to clarify this, we need you to put in this, da, 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 and then you do it. So you do all of that. You reshape and re-edit based on the kind of vision notes people would say or whatever. And then you do have this back and forth, but the editor doesn't just edit without your say. The editor will highlight it and go, I did this, what do you think? And often it's just, I put a semicolon here, or I
yeah.
took out the word that, like, you know, and then you get to reread it and go, actually, I need to include this sentence, and actually I'm not comfortable with that sentence I wrote, take it out. Like, that's what it's like. So I haven't actually gone through that, and I did have to reword a few little footnotes in the manuscript. I had to be like, oh, actually, that's not true anymore. And his, like, because I'm very earnest about my own growth when I write books. So like when I wrote that book, I was like, I've been studying fairy with Storm Fairy Wolf for a year. And yeah, Storm Fairy Wolf was my first fairy teacher. I'm always public about that. People who ask know that. Yeah, and so he was my, you know, first fairy teacher, and then I transitioned into a different fairy teacher, and then I got initiated by a different fairy teacher, as a lot of people do in Anderson Fairy. It's always kind of an interesting journey. But yeah, that I digress. But that's an example of how things kind of shifted and changed. I also reflect on that book came out in, I think it was July or June 2012. I also reflect in the beginning of that book, like directly after this book came out, like in the years preceding it, I got initiated in 3 other traditions of the craft. What I actually love, though, about ecstatic witchcraft is it really shows a distilled, methodological, kind of
Mm,
process-oriented witchcraft that was definitely what I was practicing then and what I was teaching, much of which completely informs me to this day. Like when I was reading that manuscript again, I was like, I totally forgot that I wrote about this in here, and I still do this. Like, and then there were other things that were like less, like I was like, oh, I don't do that anymore, but I do actually know that that person teaches it in that lineage because they were really affected by it. So that's always interesting, like a time capsule where you kind of realize, or where I realized, oh fuck, yeah, that's right. Some of this stuff is out in the world because primarily I'm a teacher and a mentor, and so that stuff is out there in the world being passed, and I forgot about that. Yeah.
It's a weird liminal space to be sitting in,
Yeah.
because I'm really pleased that you're not retconning yourself, because I feel like something would
That
get
I'm not
lost there.
whatting. What am
Retconning yourself. Have you
What's
come across
that?
that word? Oh, retconning is when canon from a fandom is changed to make something later fit.
Oh,
Have you not come across
okay.
that term before? I'm gonna have to send it to you.
No.
You need to use it in your work.
Oh,
It's really
apparently.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that editing out process, because I feel like I mean, just again from a therapist standpoint, people are constantly retconning themselves, constantly re-editing their
Mm,
version
mm,
of their memories, right?
mm,
And so it's
mm.
interesting that this is like the kind of penultimate. I think you've used that word before in other interviews, of where you are right now, and something that came out 12 years ago, 11 years ago, is coming out next year. If people were to read them concurrently, what do you think they would get? What is the overall message, do you think?
I think they would get, wow, Fio can be highly structured and highly process oriented, and Fio can be deeply poetic and spontaneous and weird at the same time. Yeah.
I think that's a good
That's what
message.
that's what they would get. Because ecstatic witchcraft is written much more. I mean, of course, the way I always write and the way I speak, it's inherently poetic. That's just the way I am. And I've been criticized for that. I've been, congratulated for that, whatever. It's just who I am. Like, I'm not going to apologize for the way I speak and the way I write and the way I teach. Like, I'm just not going to. And I really, truly believe that, as you mentioned, the Spiral Dance, Starhawk wrote when I think she was 27 when she wrote that book first. Like, I relate to that. And I'm sure you can relate to that on some level too. It's like she says in that book that poetry, not theology, is the language of the craft. And I
Yes.
really believe that. There are things that one can effectively, powerfully express poetically about witchcraft and the spirits and magic that one cannot didactically kind of process. So yeah, ecstatic witchcraft also, it really was like a manual alongside By Land, Sky, and Sea. They kind of were together, which is something I mentioned in an appendix. I kind of say these two books actually formed some of the bedrock of this shamanic witchcraft apprenticeship that I used to teach, which was a 2-year apprenticeship that I used to teach. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. I had a question bubbling up as you were talking just then. I'm very curious now. Kind of with that being said, how is it affecting the new one that's coming out? You said you've got another one that's coming out next year sometimes.
Well,
How
yeah,
is
actually, and also you finish your question before I.
Oh, I was just filling time.
Um, well, and to be fair, currently, I mean, originally Jane Meredith and I, who wrote this book, we were expecting that it would come out at the end of 2024, but it may now be the beginning of 2025. I don't know.
Sometime.
But that is actually part of that is part of another series of books. And if people are aware of anything that Jane Meredith and I write, you will probably easily be able to guess what that book is. So that is part of a different kind of corpus of materials, which is the reclaiming core classes. So if someone is like thinking, what could that possibly be? It's easy to Google and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. But yeah, look, that I mean, all of my writing and teaching and existing impacts all of my writing, teaching, and existing. So the way I write in that book with Jane Meredith, and that book is also got woven into that. We had to edit. We were also co-editors because woven into that book is also multiple brilliant essays by 9 or 10 other established reclaiming teachers, some of whom are very well known, some of whom are lesser known, but deeply, well known in reclaiming. And I love the book. Like, I'm so proud. Jane Meredith and I have worked very hard on that book. I'm kind of like, Fio, you need a holiday.
I was gonna say, but this is, I mean, if I said that, that would sound patronizing.
Yeah.
I was going to ask though, after all this work, all of it, I mean, you're so busy, you've got things going on all over the place, you're traveling and teaching all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
What's next for private Fio?
Yeah, what's next for private Fio? A lot of
Is
sex.
it a lot of sex? Yes.
Like, look, I'm very in love right now with someone, and you know, we're 6 months into this relating, and I mean, you know, there's a lot of sex. It's fun. Sex is sacred, sex is beautiful, sex is gorgeous, sex is weird. So a lot of that.
I believe
That's it.
the words were, "I don't want to leave his bed."
Yeah, exactly. Um, well, their bed in particular, but
Very bad.
yeah,
My
yeah,
apologies. Very bad.
yeah. And then, and that is true. um, but yeah, and then I just feel like, what else? Like, I mean, private fear. You know, it's actually, and maybe this is somewhat being Asian, but private, public. What does that even mean? I'm not so sure. Self community. What is that? It's all a bit fused for me. And I mean, I'll say this: like at the end of January, I'm going to be storing. My plan is I'm going to be storing all my stuff. I'm leaving this apartment that has nurtured me so brilliantly through heartbreak, through loss, through COVID, through all moving to this beautiful city. And I'm going to be moving out into 6 months of 6 months of kind of moving around. It has been a pattern in my life that every 2 to 3 years I move my home base, and not just to a different place in the same region. I usually move states or provinces or countries. And so I'm noticing, I'm doing that again, but it's different this time. It feels more nuanced, like, because what I'm going to be doing is, yeah, I'm going to, for 2 months I'll be down where my lover is, and where I have big witch community, and people who are old dear friends of mine. I'll be down there for 2 months. Then I'll go up to so-called Queensland, which is a state in Australia, and I'll be there for a month. I used to live there for a long time. And then I'll be in Bali for the month of May, and then I'll be in the US for June and July, and then I'll come back. You know, so 6 months later, after all of that, I'll come back to this place. This is my plan, right? And who knows? But I tend to stick to my plans. And then, you know, come what may, and then I'll be back here hopefully, and then I'll kind of reassess. But yeah, that's gonna, I don't know what that's gonna do. Is that gonna create a whole new book? I actually already did start writing another book, but it's like a pretty like heavy, intense thing for me, and I'm like, take it slow, Fio. You don't need to write that in a month. You don't need to write that in a year. You could write that in 5 years if you wanted. So yeah, I feel like I'm back. I have struggled with, I'll say this, I have struggled with my first few books came out at a time when social media and Instagram, like I only got Instagram in 2017. Like I'm not masterful with these social media things. Like I'm pretty haphazard, pretty like, let's have fun, let's do whatever. It's not, I've also not learnt it. Like some people are really studious and diligent, and they've learnt it, and it's like a whole other, it's like a workload for them, and I don't want it to be a workload for me. And so I just want my work to speak for itself. Also, as I've said, I'm primarily my actual, what I my a lot of my main stuff is that I write and teach. So that I teach and mentor. And yes, I write, and I'm writing more. But I feel like the writing is coming back now. In the past 2 years, the writing has come back, the books have come back. And I feel like I hope I can be more seamless. And you know, my name has been Fio for, like that was a spirit thing, and then my mother actually did rename me Fio in a ceremony by my own knife. It was very fabulous. I have a great family. But that was in 2013, so that was after all my first 3 books came out. And but then I did have, you know, 2 books come out, and that didn't have the name Fio on it, and that felt weird. And so The Witch Belongs to the World is the first book of mine that's come out with my full name on it, which is just so magical. And I feel like finally it's all seamlessly weaving, and this has magical effect for me. I'm noticing the magical effect. Yeah, so, and my work is is quickly getting to people who actually they're like, oh, I'm just interested in witchcraft. And I'm like, well, I wonder how you're going to go with my books, because I've always kind of I've always kind of written for people who are already witches. I've kind of always written for them because I just love witches and I love the craft. But I do think that one could read The Witch Belongs to the World. I think I say it somewhere in there, and then they'd get an idea. They get an idea that it's poetry drenched, that it's actually quite mystical, that it has the deep potentiality to really completely transform you if you dare. And yes, the devil is in the craft, and not for everyone. There are forms of the craft that have weeded that out. I have zero interest in that. I have zero interest in weeding the devil out of the craft. But then I also have an interest in recontextualizing things, because I don't want imperialist white supremacist Christendom to ever tell us what the devil is, to ever tell us what a witch is, to ever tell us what a woman is, a trans woman is, a queer person is, the earth is, religion is. I have zero interest in their agenda. So.
And it's well, it's not funny. Makes complete sense that the population that's showing up now are the same people who are not interested in that. The queer, the trans, marginalized.
Yes.
Right? I've definitely noticed that. I've also noticed that there seems to be a need for community again, right?
Yes.
So many people in rejecting the word witch, especially in the folkloric and tradcraft community. I am the so-and-so of this, I'm the cunningman of this place, I am the witch of so-and-so. I mean, that can become very limiting because it's so limited. That's the idea of really seeing then the universality of it. Would you say that that's where you're heading, is moving people into a place of universality again, or I completely got it wrong?
Universality is a tricky word for me.
Yeah.
I'm more of a fan of, my friend Pandora would say, infinite doorways to the infinite. That's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in myriad multiplicities. I'm interested in infinite doorways to the infinite. And if that also is the same thing as universality somehow, then yes. I'm interested in distinction as well. Like I'm interested in bioregional distinction. I'm interested in all these words: cunning person, Pella, wizard, spirit worker, necromancer, medium, all the sacred titles. At the end of the day, I am just who I am and I do what I do. But it is true that I have been, ever since I was very young, I have been in this, my first and ultimate love is, I kind of joke sometimes with some of my partners in the past. I'm like, my first love is always witchcraft, right? And it is true that but that's it. The thing is that's not opposite to them, of course. Like that's just the whole field for me. But that is my lens. That is my experience. I am just a witch all of the time, and I am a witch moving through the world, experiencing the world as a witch who is a human, who is queer, who, like, all of these things. I hear some people go, oh, I'm not only a witch, but I guess how I would phrase it is, well, I am witch. Like, it's kind of like, I am witch. Like, actually, it is all of that for me. But for me, it's never been a religious identifier. Like I always pushed, I used to write articles about that for Witchfox back in the day. Witchcraft is not my religion. Like it's just, and I probably phrased it very clumsily at the time. But what I was trying to say was, this is not my religion. This is my, and it's not even as naff as then saying this is a way of life or whatever. It's like, it's just who I am. It's my context. When I realized I was a witch at age 11 and then dedicated myself to it at age 12, I was like, this is it for me. and not I'm done. Like this is all the beginning. And I feel emotional even saying that. Like I am so in love with being a witch. I am so in love with witches. I am so in love with the craft. That's what I try to express when I teach, when I write, when I talk to anyone about it. When people ask me, I have a lot of friends who aren't witches these days. That did not used to be true. and they ask me, and I go, and they'll say things like, Fio, most of us actually don't know witches. Most of us actually, up until we met you, didn't realize you existed. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, really. And so I'm like, okay, let me talk a little bit about my life. Yeah, I don't know, that's it at the end of the day for me. Yeah.
I think that's probably a good place to end with that.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything else I can ask you and go deeper with that would surpass that last piece. And I think really, I mean, that's what I heard in that therapist talk.
Oh, yes, go for it. You're a therapist. Great.
Therapist talk. You said, you are a witch, just witch. And really that's where the witch belongs to the world, right?
Completely. It is.
And the world belongs to witch.
That's right. Eat it up. Experience it, love it, respect it. Yeah.
That's awesome, Fio. Fio, thank you for coming on and having a wonderful chat with me. Thank you for coming and sitting at my kitchen table and having a little cup of tea with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there anything that you would like any of the listeners to know? This is, of course, coming out second week of January. Anything that you'd like them to know?
Buy my books. You can follow me on Instagram. I also at Fio Gede Parma. My website is the same. I'm sure there'll be links. Also, I am consistently running classes and courses both in person wherever I am and always via Zoom. And I've been doing that long before COVID was a thing. So if you're interested in directly working with me, and often I teach with other people who are fabulous and excellent. And if you're interested in diving into like kind of rigorous magical work, like just look at my website or Instagram or Facebook and you'll see it.
Right. And again, anybody who's watching this on the YouTube channel, you can see their website just down below underneath their name. For those who are listening on Spotify and whatnot, it'll be in the show notes. Go and give Fio a like on social media. It really does make a big difference, as always, for us authors. And this has been a second episode of our Kitchen Table Talks. Thank you so much, Fio. This has been Fio Gede Parma. I've been Ben Stimson. Have a great rest of the day, folks. Thank you.
Thank you.